employee documents. That is your contract between you and the franchisee. Franchising is highly regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, and it protects both you and the franchisee. But when you read a franchise agreement for the first time, as most of you probably have, you're like, oh my God, who would sign this? It sounds like it's totally in your favor. But it's not. I explain to franchise candidates and prospects, it's to protect you too from that possible knucklehead road franchise you might sell someday. And I had so many franchisees come to me to rat on another franchisee over the years, and I was able to stop what they were doing like that, and they were really glad that we had a strong franchise agreement to allow them to do that. Protection granted for everyone, not just you, the franchisor. So anyway, we now have Bill Graefe, our franchise attorney, is going to come up and take you through the aspects of building your FDD.
Great. Thank you. Those were two tough acts to follow. I don't know the gentleman who was doing the haberdashery services there, but that is an amazing experience. That looks pretty cool. And I love the speaker beforehand in her success story. She said a lot of things that were really good there. One thing I wanted to point out is, and I never really hear too many franchisors talking about that, but it's so important to look at your brand and see about ways you can maybe edge it or make it better, anything you can do to make it more easy and automatic for your franchisees, because they're not you and they're not as good as you. That's the way you have to think about it. Just wanted to mention that. So with that said, my name is Bill Graefe. I'm an attorney in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is my first time in Dallas. It's a little scary for me. I'm a big Eagles fan, but discussion points for today, we're going to talk about the legal definition of a franchise. We're going to talk about the types of franchising relationships and agreements you guys can enter into. Number 3 is something a little new, which was I was tinkering with back there, so apologies if anything gets out of order in here, but breaking down the FDD and primary disclosures. I'm going to focus a little bit more on that today than I have in other conversations, because it's really the first step. There's a lot in there, and I want to get you guys as far along as I can during this conversation. Regulatory landscape and state registrations, and then risks and exposure for non-compliance. So what constitutes a franchise under applicable law? This gentleman right here is not me in 30 years. It is actually Ben Franklin. He was the first person who technically sold a franchise. It was in 1789 or around there, and it was with his printing press and the Poor Richard. I thought that was a really cool fact. I didn't realize, and it was out of Philadelphia, which is where I'm from, so just thought I'd mention that. Since that time, the FTC has created a pretty expansive definition, as Rick was just getting to, of what can be a franchise. It's a payment or commitment to pay $500 in the first 6 months under federal law of the relationship, a licensing of a trademark or a service mark in connection with the operation of a business or the sale of goods, and significant marketing assistance or supervision provided to the licensee party. Now, as Rick mentioned, a lot of times I get clients that come to me and they've already been licensing. Well, usually what it comes down to is they're like, I accepted money, I took we're definitely licensing a mark. It was really always this one that they're always like, well, I don't do that. But the FTC and NASA examiners provide about 15 to 18 different criteria and a list of things that could be even on its own or with the other factors. If that exists, it might satisfy that third prong. It's intended to be an expansive test. So whenever you guys think you're borderline, or I would talk to an attorney about it, or someone else who knows franchising. The test is meant to be encompassing. Number 3 on there is important to note, if you're in California, New York, or you're going to be selling franchises there, Maryland as well, they have more expansive definitions about what a franchise is. For example, a lot of times it's about the $500 in 6 months. New York says $500 anytime. So if they're paying you any money, other than for a bona fide wholesale price for inventory or something like that, like sneakers or something like that, you're probably going to hit that prong, the payment prong there. Any questions? Types of franchise offering and corresponding agreements. The most typical one is number 1 up there. That's how it all starts, a single unit franchise agreement. That's what awards the right to the person to actually operate the franchise. There's also what multi-unit development agreements. Sometimes that depends on the kind of model you are. How many of you guys are bricks and mortar? Okay, and how many, the rest of you are mobile service, I'm taking it? Mobile retail? Okay. If you're doing a bricks and mortar, you're more likely going to have an area development agreement. And basically, that's about a 10-page, it can be anywhere from 10 to, people can make it longer, but it's basically just giving them a development schedule and a development area. So they might open 3 over 3 years, and let's say somewhere in Texas, Frisco, Texas. So that's how an ADA would look. When you have a mobile service concept without the bricks and mortar, sometimes it doesn't exactly fit the model because they might not need to have 3 different premises. So sometimes we do what's called a multi-unit territory addendum, which is just another way of kind of giving them a schedule to expand their business as they get bigger. Each franchise business should be governed by its own franchise agreement in most cases. That way, if something goes wrong with one of the franchises, you can allow them to cut off their nose to save their face, in other words, rather than having to terminate everything. 2 other types of franchise offerings we're not going to talk about too much today because they're a little more complex. Area rep offering and a master franchise offering. In both of those, you're usually giving away a larger area. Sometimes it's international. Sometimes international countries will give a master franchise or area rep right to someone here in the US. Usually you handle a bigger area. Under the area rep model, they recruit, support, and kind of lead them. They're kind of like a broker in a way in that they kind of give you leads that you then enter into a franchise agreement with as the franchisor. The only difference, broadly speaking, between area rep and master franchise, or the primary difference I should say, is that in a master franchise, they are actually going to enter, the master franchisee is going to enter into the agreement, the franchisor doesn't. Under an area rep, they recruit them, they bring them in, do discovery days, do everything, but it's still up to the franchisor to sign the agreements and approve the franchisee. The primary pre-disclosure obligation, just from top down, I think you've heard this already today, so I'll breeze through it. You have to have an FDD. It contains 23 different disclosure items and some exhibits. We're going to get into that in a minute. The FDD must be given to the person, the prospect, at least 14 calendar days before you sign them or accept any money from them that's related to the franchise. And I wouldn't call it a deposit or things like that. And then, ahead of time, and then later, credit that towards their franchise fee. Anything you collect before then will be a violation. And the other big broad line step, overview step here is to collect and save 1 copy of the receipt page to the FDD. That's the last 2 pages of this big document that can make your eyes go crossed even for me as I write it. But at the very end, there's 2 pages. Whenever you're giving that FDD to someone, you want to make it clear that as soon as I give it to you, please sign it. You do via DocuSign or whatever else, but please get that back to me ASAP because that's really what your proof is of when you disclose them. So the quicker they get it back to you, the more likely the 14, 15 days you'll meet that standard. So we're going to go into the FDD now. We're going to break it down. I have 5 categories, or 6 categories here. The enterprise, I call it the first one. It's the history of the brand concept, the current franchise offering, and the current business team. We have system standards, specifications, and requirements. The third topic I'm going to talk about is grant of franchise and related territory licenses. 4, amounts and fees payable by the system franchisees. Number 5, liabilities and obligations of the parties. And number 6, earning claims and exhibits. This isn't exactly in order or anything like that, guys. I'm trying to approach it very practically and kind of group things together as we go through here. With the enterprise, the first thing you're going to do is describe the franchisor. First little thing to put a star on is, are you going to form a new franchisor? Most of you will be doing that. Very rarely do you allow your affiliate operator to be the franchisor or use an existing entity. So that's something that's a legal fee that's outside the FDD flat fee and things like that, but also for planning purposes, you might want to get in front of your accountant and make sure you know what state to form in, what kind of entity to form as. Most times I see LLCs. People don't really do Delaware anymore. If you're going to have a physical base and a physical headquarters, I'd usually file in the state where you're located. The parent and predecessor, a parent company will only come into play if your franchisor is owned by an entity and not by individuals. Pretty easy and self-explanatory there. Predecessor will only come into play if you had a licensing system before or a franchisor entity before, or if you were to sell or acquire someone else's entity. Franchisor, you might have to talk about the past history. Yes, sir.
You have to have 2 different FDDs, like 5/8. We have plumbing or adding AC. Can there be within one FDD by 2 different licenses? One, or would that have to be
2 different marks? For the 2, you said plumbing and AC?
Yes.
So are they 2 different marks or they?
Marks meaning?
I'm sorry, proprietary marks, the mark they operate, their brand. Are they 2 different brands?
right now, the way we're viewing it, it'd be one brand, it just be added AC to.
It makes it a little more complicated, but I've done it before. If it's the same mark, you can usually do that, so they're not gonna be doing both, they'd only be doing one?
Well, I don't.
One or the other?
Both aspects, so
Okay.
we're adding AC, so it'd be one that I can also franchise with it, but in addition, you can do it.
It would have to be a business decision from there, but you could do it either way. Good question though. And then after the predecessor parent stuff, and you're talking about the franchisor, the relevant affiliates, it's an expansive definition for affiliates, but basically any affiliate that offered franchises or that sells products to the franchisees, you gotta disclose in item 1. Description of the franchise business, we'll get to in a minute, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Marketing competition. Your business team, this is item 2. Most of the stuff above is item 1. Item 2 is certain people have to be listed. Officers, directors, managers of the franchisor. Anyone else who has management responsibility with regard to the franchise system also needs to be disclosed in item 2. That means the buck stops with them. So if there's a training director, but still someone else supervises it, the CEO, then you don't have to list that person in item 2 necessarily. It's usually an analysis you should do with your attorney. They have to list their name, a 5-year employment history, and as I say right there, any litigation or bankruptcy history over the past 10 years that involves fraud, securities, claims, franchise-related claims, and things like that. It's usually done via a questionnaire with your attorney. They kind of filter through, and sometimes it can help you decide who you're going to have in item 2 if there's bankruptcy history, because it's in there for 10 years after the filing. Even if it was a personal bankruptcy, I got discharged 8 years ago. Right? But if they're in item 2, that has to go in item 3 of your FDD. So a lot of times people do that analysis and sometimes move things around afterwards. Last thing for the enterprise one is any industry-specific laws or regulations that might come into play. So if you're doing mobile service stuff and you're doing driveway or painting, for example, or something like that, is there any EPA laws or anything like that that you might need to do? Does California and a lot of places have specific licenses you need in order to be a painter? Those are things you would bring up very generally in item 1 of the FDD, but at the same time, the FDD and the franchise agreement make it clear that it's on the franchisee to do its own research of its own state laws and everything like that and comply with the same. It's not on the franchisor to do that, but the more you can help them, as I just said, the better. These are just ideas for describing the franchise business. So I'm not going to go through each one because I know we have limited time, but describing the approved services and products, the premises, is it a home office, is it a third party premises they're going to have to get? The size, things like that. The more you mention up front in item 1, the better, I think. It sometimes provides clarity. It also gives you an opportunity to distinguish your brand without being a sales tool, which the FDD is not. It's a consumer protection tool, but it doesn't have to be a sales deterrent either. So item 1, I like to go in as much detail as I can with my clients. If they have approved vehicles, if they use a services agreement, identifying the marks that you're currently using and any marks you might be using in the future. And then general language regarding the system that's developed by you guys. So that would be approved supplier relationships, required item specifications, things like that. And we'll get into that in a later slide. I know I'm talking fast here, guys. Any questions at this point? All this makes sense? All right, I'll take it. So after enterprise, we have system standards, specifications, and requirements. This is going to be everywhere throughout the FDD. There's different places where you have to talk about your model and what you can require them to do. I put operations manual first on there. That's not part of the FDD. That's a separate document. That's a document that can be unilaterally updated by you guys at any time to change certain things, fees that you pay to approved suppliers, who that approved supplier is, any required items that might change or any additional things. It's a very powerful tool because you can unilaterally change it as long as you give the franchisees notice. They have to comply with it 30, 60 days later. So I put that one first, and that's where a lot of your super secret sauce is going to go, right? You don't really want to share that with them until after they sign, but we do want to talk about, from a broad level throughout the FDD, what required items you guys have, what approved suppliers, which of those required items have approved suppliers. So by way of example, you would say POS software, point of sale software. We have a required approved supplier. You wouldn't tell them who that approved supplier is or what software you're using in the FDD, but you just have to identify what kind of item and that you do, whether or not you have an approved supplier for it. Go ahead, sir.
Does this document allow like trademark up your operation manual so they can't, what do I?
Copyright.
Yeah, copywriting, it's like.
They're going to sign all kinds of NDAs, you know what I mean, non-disclosure, confidentiality provisions in the franchise agreement. That's another good question. The real thing though is I would try to make it accessible online so they can't copy it necessarily and do some practical solutions, because what are you going to do? You know what I mean? What are you going to do when a guy leaves McDonald's? You think, you know, you might get back. They used to have a big hard copy of it and you would get it back, but that was a headache too. I think the best way to do it is have it online, update it online, shoot them, but like you can drop access for them. And if they can't copy it and you drop the access when they're expired or terminated, it'd be a lot harder to copy. Great question though. Personnel recommendations and guidelines. In this ops meeting, you're going to tell them how to do a lot of things. One thing you don't want to do too much of is tell them how to engage, hire, fire, or anything. You can say, look, if you're not going to run the business day to day, you have to have a designated manager and they have to come to our training. Things like that. You might say we typically have 5 people on the floor at a restaurant or at a fitness facility, but it's not something you can require or dictate, because then you get into joint employer, co-employer type issues, and you got to be careful with that. Another thing you can talk about and draw those lines with your attorney when you're going through the FTD. Same thing with pricing. You can suggest minimum, maximum pricing. You can maybe even set minimum, maximum pricing in certain states, but you cannot dictate this is $3.99, this is $4.99, this is $5.99. You cannot do that as a franchisor. That's why when you see the $5 foot long or whatever it is now, probably $6.99 foot long at Subway, it still says participating franchisees only in the bottom, because you can't make franchisees necessarily do that. Site selection guidelines are super important if you have a third-party premises involved. Letting them know how to find the right area and having criteria ready to go is important. Advertising and marketing standards, pre-launch licensing and permitting. So anything that you think they're going to have to get beforehand, you should make sure that they go through the processes and or use the consultants you recommend or approve to get those licenses and certifications. And then the last one for your system standard specifications requirements is initial training program. Again, happy to talk about this offline, but you can talk all day just on that piece. That's where you're just going to put a chart and you're going to have to explain by hours, how many hours on each topic of instruction you provide, how long it'll take, how often you'll provide it, who's going to supervise that training program. That all goes in item 11. I'm just going to say one more thing on this. Required items and approved suppliers, make it as easy as possible for the franchisee by having as many of those as possible. But the more approved suppliers you have, the more easier you can check and make sure the guys are actually buying the stuff. Inventory and things like that without you becoming part of the supply chain. Sometimes franchisor will be in the supply chain and actually sell the things and they can track it that way. But on other items, you can always call up your guy, and check either the required software, or you can check their inventory, how much inventory did these guys buy. It's a nice way to monitor and enforce your agreement and make sure they're buying the right and actively operating. All right, third one's the grant of franchise and related rights. I'm sorry about the text here. It's a little bit more than I wanted in there. But basically, these are just some of the questions we're going to answer. What activities will the system franchisee be able to promote, offer, and perform? You have to describe their initial term, their renewal rights, their assignment rights, and any franchisor right to purchase. Sometimes that right to purchase comes after expiration or termination of the agreement. The franchisor can step in, buy the assets, and assume the lease so it doesn't shut down. Other times, some agreements, more rarely now, will have something where it says, look, at any time after the first 2 years, I can make you an offer you can't refuse. Here's the price tag it'll be. Here's how it's calculated, and you got to sell to us. What rights does franchisor want to reserve, and what kind of territory are we going to give these guys? Another one you can spend all day on, but the things I'm noting here is most franchises do give territories. Not all. I'm working with one right now that we're battling through that. But most do give a territory that's kind of exclusive or territorial and gives them some sort of rights or exclusive rights in there. But you always want to look at reserved rights and what rights you want to reserve. Alternative channels of distribution, including the internet, for like people that sell products. That's an important one. Non-traditional locations, such as airports, universities, stadiums. So if you have a restaurant, you give someone a restaurant concept, and you franchise in Philadelphia, for example, well, franchisor would reserve the right to put it in the Lincoln Financial Field or any of the stadiums there, the bus, the train station, things like that. That's an important one to reserve as well. And then the last one is just to give you flexibility in case there's an exit strategy or you become merged with someone else or you want to buy somebody else and they might be somewhat competitive. That's an important one to put in there too. How will the territory be described? Zip codes, a radius, a map, a kid's drawing with crayon. I've seen it all, but you really want to make sure you make it clear where that map is. And territory mapping software is available, and I know the team at FCC, they know a lot about market saturation. So when you're creating your FDD in item 12, we're going to describe what a typical franchise might get, but I'm never going to let you guarantee a certain franchise territory because that just gives you headaches down the road. If you're gonna have a multi-unit franchise offering, you gotta talk about the same thing with development area. How big is that gonna be? It's gotta be bigger. They gotta have enough enough meat on the bone to try to open up 3 or 5, whatever they've agreed to do. And then the last thing to do with licensing is the trademark rights being licensed. You gotta identify your mark, whether you've applied for it or not, whether it's registered with the USPTO, whether or not you need a trademark license. So a lot of times your affiliate operator, if you have a mark now, who has a registered trademark or a filed for trademark. A lot of times it's in the entity that you're using now. So you're gonna need a trademark license, simple 1, 2-pager between that entity and the franchisor that licenses them the right to use the mark in connection with the franchise system. One note on that, don't charge the franchisor a royalty. It's hard enough for franchisors to make money in their first couple of years with the revenue recognition rules and all the costs. Don't try to stay away from that. Maybe later on down the road, you can get a VIG out of there, or a license fee, but I wouldn't do it early on. And then the last thing you got to do with the mark is let them know if there's any third parties out there that you're aware of that have might be using a confusingly similar mark. Will I breathe here? Any questions? Good, because I think I'm going to get killed. Again, the text on this, I apologize. Next one's amounts and fees payable. Item 7 is the initial investment. Other than item 19, it's probably the number one thing. Franchisees get an FDD and they go, oh, there's item 7. Item 19, how much does it cost? How much can I make, right? Is how they're thinking. Item 7 is super important. During COVID, a lot of franchises didn't get any relief from the bank or landlord. So who'd they come after when they couldn't operate? The franchisor. And what did they come after? It wasn't item 19 as much as it was item 7. All of a sudden, people are like, oh, your item 7's too low. And that's, your initial investment to both open and launch your operations and operate for a reasonable period of time, ramp up period. Sometimes that's 3 months. Sometimes people consider it 6 months. I found that more bricks and mortar ones are 3 months versus mobile service can take a little longer to up ramp, and it's a pound of pavement industry, so maybe 6 months there. But that's something you'll work through with your counsel and Franchise Genesis. They've been good about helping on the projects we've worked on and getting that information. Item 5 is amounts paid, the initial franchise fee, the development fee, anything that's paid to the franchisor or its affiliates prior to opening. Sometimes that's inventory, initial inventory kit, initial marketing kit, things like that as well. That all goes in item 5. Item 6 is ongoing fees, like royalty fees. I gave you a whole list there. Royalty fees, fund contributions, even a local marketing or advertising requirement. If you have to spend $500 a month, but you're reserving the right to collect $300 of it and spend it on digital marketing for them, that would go in there. Technology fees, software fees that are third party. When you're doing your tech fee, I would charge one right away, but figure out what it actually covers versus the third party stuff and what you want to get involved with and how much you're going to charge them. How much of that do you want to be responsible for versus just letting them license with third parties? But when you have the responsibility, you also have visibility into everything more too. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. That's interesting. It's usually an exercise I make my clients go through. And the last one, it's primary, would be required inventory or other ongoing purchases. So if you got to buy, they're doing a driveway thing and they got to buy stone from your affiliate, which is usually the way something like that would work for inventory purchases, it would be an affiliate of the franchisor that would sell that to them. That would have to go into item 6 as well. Other fees that need to be identified are simple. You've probably seen them before: renewal fee, transfer fee, and then there's fees that if they're in default, they have to pay our attorney's fees, or they might have to pay a relocation fee if they make a relocation request, things like that. But it's all in the item 6 chart. And if you guys want to catch up after this call, I'm happy to talk more about it. I don't know what number this is now. I'm lost. I've been up since 2 a.m. flying in here this morning. But liabilities and obligations of franchisee and franchisor. That's set forth in items 9 and 17. There's 2 charts. Basically spells out all the section references in both the franchise agreement and area development agreement. where, for site selection and time to open and time to secure a lease, all that stuff will be covered mostly in item 9. Item 17 actually not only gives you the section number, it gives you a short summary of what the agreement says in terms of governing law, dispute resolution, transfer conditions, renewal conditions, initial term, and things like that. So it's kind of like a nice Rolodex or index for prospects to look and maybe compare between brands. Item 11 also talks about is where franchisee has to talk about the pre-opening and post-opening actions it'll take on behalf of the franchisor. I just say there, discretion equals flexibility and the right to analyze on a case-by-case basis. So when I say they're going to do something, I either usually say will do, not may, because the state examiners don't like that. But you say, franchisor will, as it deems appropriate in its discretion, or reasonable discretion sometimes. But you always want to give yourself flexibility when you're drafting this thing, because, well, that's a snapshot in time, the FDD. They're going to be signing an agreement that could be up to 30 years long. So you need to make sure you have flexibility and build that in the document throughout. Item 1, let franchisee know what it's responsible for from the start. There's certain places in there where I like to really drill home any big requirements or things that are unique to the model. Always remember, franchisee is the independent owner of the franchise business, and you have to be sensitive to joint employer pitfalls. So you want to help them, but some things they got to do on their own. They independently own and operate this business. It's not a under a corporate umbrella or something, a chain like that. It's truly supposed to be independently owned and operated. So while you tell them what they got to do, you don't have to hold their hand too much to get them to do it if there are obligations that are involved with anything that could trigger joint employer or anything like that. Earnings claims and exhibits. First up, we'll talk about earnings claims very quickly. Has anyone looked at an FTD and saw item 19? Does anyone have an item 19 they're working on right now on drafting, or P&Ls? Has anyone started going through all their numbers as they look at franchising to see how they perform? Anybody, a little bit? It's one of the first things you should do, and one of the first things you should show Franchise Genesis so they know where you guys are at on that. But basically, you're only going to be using historical data. If I have 2 affiliate restaurants, I could use that. So I could use their top line sales. I could go primary indicators such as top line sales, rent, labor, and cost of goods. That's usually the big ones. Or you could go to a full P&L. Just be aware that if you don't just put top line numbers in there, if you go any deeper than that to show the unit level economics, which I recommend you do, you also have to estimate and include and account for royalty fees, fund contributions, and other recurring amounts they're going to pay under the agreement. Go ahead, sir.
How far back do we have to?
You want to go back, you want to do, well, it really depends on the situation. Really depends on the situation, and I think we're definitely talking after this, because you guys, I love the questions. That's very case by case, and it really depends on the whole evolution of the brand, what marks they've been using. Go ahead, sir.
Do you recommend younger brands to disclose an item 19?
I do most times, I would say, and this is why. You got to provide them a script, because if it's not an item 19, you can't say it. Not only you, your salespeople over here, your brokers over here, your cousin Jim over here who just wants to sell 1 or 2 for you, it has a buddy. You have to be very careful of that, because anything that's not an item 19 that you say it's an earnings claim is honestly a get out of jail free card.
This is a sales question. Put yourself in the candidate's shoes. If you can't share anything with them,
I get that. I've worked in-house, have in-house attorneys with corporate offices that I've worked, and some of them are very open, let's share a full panel, and then I have others no, we're only going to talk about gross revenue and then a couple of items, because they're afraid of getting sued if a franchisee doesn't come anywhere near what's provided in the item.
I would share with more. More is better, and you can.
And I would try to share something.
You can have disclaimer language. At least it gives you an opportunity to talk about it.
It could even be a price per ticket thing. Like if you could do it in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of financial metrics you can use beyond the P&L. It could be, price per ticket or whatever, average price per ticket, number of customers, things like that. Anything to give them something to talk about, because if you don't, they're probably going to get themselves in trouble. Yeah. Am I running late?
Yeah.
All right, okay. Well, we got a lot more here. Required exhibits under here. These are just the other exhibits that need to go in there. It's copies of the agreements, audited financials, or unaudited in your first year, depending on what states you go into. State effective page, release agreement, blah, blah, blah. Current franchisees, former franchisees. I'm happy to give you guys these slides. So just to recap here, just real quick, we had 6 areas: enterprise, amounts and fees payable, grant and related territory licensing, liability and obligations, earnings, claims and exhibits, system standards and specs. I don't know if you guys get what I did up there, but that's EAGLES, Eagles. As a Philly guy, I'm in Cowboy territory. I gotta do it. I'll see you at the game. Now, there's some rule disclosures here. I'm gonna skip over that. State registration breakdown, these are just some registration states. There's the map. As you can see, this side over here has a lot of areas that are kind of open. Florida's an easy one. This is usually the area where people like to start out. The hardest ones are New York, California, Maryland over there. They're some of the tougher ones. And again, we can talk about this more, but you can see this whole map here, and I'm happy to take a picture of it if you want. There's also some BizOp states here, Georgia, Louisiana. If you don't have a federally registered trademark, you might have to file BizOps in some of these states before you offer or sell. I'm gonna skip over that one. When you make a negotiated change for a franchisee, do it in an addendum, but not all negotiated changes for one franchisee have to affect your disclosure document. You have to renew it, you have to do annual updates every year within 120 years of the franchisor's fiscal year end. So talk to your auditors early and talk to your counsel early, so that for most people it's April 30th of each year. Make sure you're on track in November and you start talking about it. Non-compliance, I don't need to go into those, but there's obviously a lot of consequences for non-compliance, anywhere from monetary damages, rescission, where you have to pay them back every penny they paid to start the franchise, not just what they paid you. And then there could be even civil and criminal fines.